Hello fellow exiles, today I would like to share a Gemling caster build. This is a spark-driven setup running dual cast on elemental ailment and cast on critical, built on Archmage scaling, with a second damage layer that comes from Gemling's quality scaling. It produces consistent, full-screen comet coverage in 200% delirium maps, with high monster effectiveness and ailment thresholds. Let's talk cost up front. This requires around 3,000 divines. There is no budget entry point. Trigger-based caster builds cost what they cost this league. Several support gems and gear pieces without cheaper substitutes are all part of that. If that investment range isn't realistic for you right now, the mechanical concepts still transfer to other builds, so it may still be worth sticking around. If you find this kind of content useful, please consider subscribing. The PoE and Mobalytics page are linked in the description. Now let's start with the core problem this league created for trigger builds and how this build addresses it. Patch 0.5 adjusted both monster ailment thresholds and toughness in the endgame. We know that cast on elemental ailment acquires energy when we freeze, ignite, or shock enemies, and these ailments are now significantly harder to inflict. From testing, it feels roughly 2 to 3 times harder than previous leagues to achieve the same rate of CoEA energy acquisition. Cast on critical has a similar problem, since the higher monster ailment threshold means critting with meaningful damage to gain more energy is harder with the same gear levels. So the question becomes, how do we keep the triggers flowing? The foundation is Adonia's Ego Wand and its Pinnacle of Power buff. When active, Pinnacle of Power makes all of our elemental damage types contribute to freeze, ignite, and shock simultaneously. This is not new. It was a popular approach in previous leagues, but it remains one of the very few caster options available outside of Infernalist to reliably trigger CoEA at high frequency. It does come with a cost. Pinnacle of Power is a manually activated buff on roughly a 1-minute cycle that needs to be monitored and renewed. Slightly tedious, but manageable once we get used to it. Freeze and Ignite are the main energy contributing ailments for CoEA. Freeze provides a flat 10 energy per monster power we freeze with hits, making it our most consistent energy source against general mobs. Freeze is affected by both the monster's ailment threshold and toughness, and both are substantially higher this league. We address that with the Sine Aequo unique gloves, which allow us to immobilize enemies at 50% buildup. Because freeze is classified as a form of immobilization, this effectively halves the difficulty to freeze any given enemy, resulting in much faster CoEA energy acquisition. Ignite contributes energy proportional to the ignite causing damage dealt, divided by the monster's ailment threshold. Since ailment thresholds are higher, we need to push harder on the ignite causing damage. We stack critical hits and scale magnitude of ailments primarily through time-lost jewels socketed in 2 passive tree locations. We will cover them later in the passive tree section, but the takeaway here is that they're a major contributor to keeping ignite energy productive against single targets. We run 2 cast on elemental ailment setups simultaneously, enabled by the absent amulet base from breach content. The CoEA provided by the amulet does not reserve our own spirit. In the self-reserved CoEA, we socket Comet along with its support gems. This is our primary damage trigger. Because this CoEA is self-reserved, it benefits more from quality scaling. We'll come back to why that matters in a moment. In the amulet's CoEA, we socket Living Bomb with Overabundance 2, plus Frost Wall and Glacier. Living Bomb and Overabundance 2 together produce lots of fire infusions, which Comet then consumes to become fire infused, dealing more damage and gaining a larger area of effect. Frostwall is doing something more impactful. This league, GGG, added Gemling exclusive quality scaling to a large batch of skill gems. Frostwall received a particularly generous one. In our setup, the total quality scaling gives Frostwall 880% increased ice crystal life. Together with other sources of increases, this pushes the wall's life to around 600,000. We link Verglass support to Spark, our trigger driver skill. Verglass provides Spark with 1% extra cold damage per 2,000 life of the ice crystals it destroys. At 600,000 life per Frostwall, that's roughly 300% extra cold damage gained on Spark. In effect, this is like an additional Archmage that scales off Ice Crystal life for Spark exclusively. Beyond the Ice Crystal synergy, we also link Arbiter's Ignition to Spark. Every time we ignite an enemy with Spark, Arbiter's Ignition grants the Elemental Archon buff. Paired with the Dominion passive, Elemental Archon stays near permanent at half effect, which is a substantial boost to our overall triggering consistency. Quality scaling does more than boost Frostwall. It also makes Archmage provide 6% extra lightning damage per 100 maximum mana, instead of the normal 4%. In addition, quality scaling gives our self-reserved CoEA 88% increased reservation efficiency, reducing its spirit cost from 100 to just 53. We push this further with Atziri's Communion support linked to Trinity. Atziri's Communion converts Trinity's spirit reservation into a life reservation, costing 66% of our maximum life instead of 100 spirit. This does two things. First, it frees up even more spirit, allowing us to run 3 trigger skills plus Archmage, Trinity, and our other persistent skills on just 270 total spirit. Second, it puts us permanently at low life, which activates Pain Attunement for 30% more critical damage. Now we have the damage engine running. The next problem is mana, since Archmage plus Eldritch Battery's double mana cost creates serious mana pressure. Our Cast on Critical setup contains level 6 Grim Pillars, supported by Creeping Chill, Spell Cascade, and Astral Projection. Creeping Chill allows Grim Pillars to consume power charges. Spell Cascade causes each trigger to generate 3 sets of pillars. Combined, each Grim Pillar's trigger can consume up to 3 power charges. On the passive tree, the Well of Power cluster allows us to recover 11% of our maximum mana each time we consume a power charge. 3 charges consumed per trigger means 33% of our maximum mana recovered instantly every single time Grim Pillars fires. Astral Projection is there to prevent the pillars from spawning around us and blocking movement. Power charge generation feeds back through the Infusion of Power passive node. Living Bomb generates fire infusions. Comet consumes those fire infusions, and because of Infusion of Power, that consumption generates power charges for the Grim Pillars loop to consume. The system is self-sustaining as long as we're hitting enemies. On top of the loop, we also layer additional mana sustain sources. The Arcane Remnants passive allows us to recover 3% maximum mana each time we pick up a remnant. The Living Bomb plus Comet combo, Siphon Elements, and Mana Remnants all generate lots of remnants. Of course, given the nature of remnants, we need to stack a certain amount of increased remnant pickup range. This is primarily achieved through the Remnant Attraction passive node and modifiers on rings. Then Heart of the Well Jewel provides 2% mana recovery on kill. We also stack roughly 130% increased mana cost efficiency from various sources, and the Gemling Ascendancy node provides 30% less skill costs. Every single one of these recovery methods is instant recovery, not regeneration. That distinction matters because instant recovery is unaffected by reduced or less mana recovery rate modifiers. This means we can allocate mind over matter for all damage taken from mana before life, without worrying about MOM's less recovery rate penalty. It does require our maximum mana to be 4,200 at minimum for the whole system to function comfortably. The skills and support gem links are on screen now. Please pause if needed, or refer to PoB and Mobalytics for details. There are a few specific gem level and quality targets that matter. Most skill gems should be level 21, with plus 23% quality, to maximize the Gemling quality scaling. Living Bomb specifically needs to stay at level 2, Grim Pillars at level 6, powered by Verisium at level 8. For Archmage, we want level 21, but with quality capped at plus 15%. The reason is that Archmage's quality scaling adds additional mana cost, and we need to keep its effective quality just above 40% to get that 2% extra damage gain per 100 maximum mana, without pushing the mana cost beyond what our sustain can handle. Now, let's take a look at the passive tree. If we followed the gem linking exactly as shown before, we'll achieve the balance of 3 support gem types needed to fully benefit from the gem-studded Ascendancy node. We use a split personality jewel to start from the Sorceress area. 3 specific passive notables, Infusion of Power, Dominion, and Paragon, need to be obtained through a combination of Helmet Anointment, Amulet Anointment, and a Megalomaniac Diamond Jewel. The exact allocation depends on the Megalomaniac we find. The critical scaling setup lives in 2 jewel sockets. At the 1 o'clock position, we socket a time-lost sapphire with its radius upgraded to very large. Required modifiers include notable passives within the radius, also granting increased magnitude of ailments, increased critical hit chance, and critical damage bonus. Paired with a From Nothing diamond on conduit in the area, we can allocate 9 notable nodes without connecting them to the main tree, all benefiting from the time-lost sapphire's bonuses. At the 3 o'clock position, we socket another time-lost sapphire with the same modifiers, covering 5 additional notable nodes. Together, they offer significant crit and ailment magnitude bonuses. Full tree details are in POB and on Mobalytics. Now for the gear. Since this is a high investment build, where every slot serves a specific mechanical purpose, we'll walk through each piece. The main hand on weapon set 1 holds an Adonia's Ego unique wand. This wand is mandatory. We need a corrupted copy with 3 sockets. The ideal quality would be plus 30% for the maximum pinnacle of power damage bonus, though plus 20% works fine. The difference is around 10% more overall damage. Make sure to check the power charge modifier. We want either plus 1 to maximum power charges or no power charge modifier. Avoid -1 because it directly undermines our Grim Pillar's mana recovery loop. In the sockets, we place Legacy of Life Sprig for plus 2 to levels of all spell skills, a plus 1 to all spell skills rune, and the Warding Rune of Equinox to allow our mana regeneration to also apply to Runic Ward. That rune carries a 40% less mana recovery rate penalty, but since our primary recovery is entirely instant-based, it doesn't affect us at all. Palm of the Dreamer Scepter goes in the offhand. It provides the spirit we need for our persistent skill reservations, and also grants the Dreaming Gloom Shrine effect, great for clearing. Prefer one with the increased skill effect duration modifier. On weapon set 2, we carry the Whispering Ice Staff, mainly for applying strong exposure effect in single target fights. We want the elemental resistance lowering modifier as high as possible. Socket in a soul core that gives 50% chance to gain an additional power charge when generating power charges. As mentioned before, we want the Absent Amulet for our dual CoEA setup. It must carry Cast on Elemental Ailment. We prefer an uncorrupted one. If the amulet's CoEA isn't at level 20, apply a Perfect Flux and Perfect Jeweler's Orb. Make sure the quality with caster modifiers is at least plus 34%. The required modifiers are plus 50 to Spirit, 8% increased maximum mana, or a Tier 1 flat maximum mana roll, plus 4 to levels of all spell skills, and plus 5% to quality of all skills. For the anointment, choose Dominion, Paragon, or Infusion of Power, based on what our Megalomaniac covers. For the rings, we need a mnemonic ring base, paired with Kalandra's Touch on the other slot to mirror it. For prefixes, we want increased mana cost efficiency, flat maximum mana, and percentage increased maximum mana. For suffixes, we want all elemental resistance, increased cast speed, and remnant pickup range. That last modifier is essential. Our mana sustain depends partially on picking up remnants, and without adequate pickup range, we'll struggle with mana sustain. For the helmet, we need an energy shield base with 2 sockets. We want as much energy shield as possible, with resistances on suffixes. One socket takes Idol of Ishtar for 15% increased cost efficiency. The other takes Raven-touched shards to enable anointment on the helmet, for one of our 3 required notables. Make sure the helmet is not corrupted before socketing the shards and applying the anointment. For body armor, look for a Vile Robe base with at least 2 sockets. Socket Medved's Tending Rune during crafting to access the percentage increased maximum mana modifier, which can roll up to 20%. We want this on the prefixes, then resistances and intelligence on suffixes. Socket a Fox Idol for its bonded stats, granting plus 5% to quality of all skills. For the gloves, we've discussed why Sine Aequo matters for freezing mobs. The key preparation steps are specific and order dependent. First, get them to plus 20% quality and convert them to the Runic Ward version, which provides 84 Runic Wards. That amount is precisely what Grim Pillars needs for its Runic Ward cost, sustained by our Warding Rune of Equinox rune on the wand. Then, socket Cadogan's Epiphany rune to create a jewel socket. Do both of these before corrupting. We want the corrupted pair with the immobilized build-up percentage as low as possible, and the damage against immobilized enemies percentage as high as possible. In the jewel socket, we place a 5 modifier Sapphire with increased spell damage and increased effect of suffixes on the prefix, plus 2 critical hit chance mods and critical damage bonus on the suffixes. For the belt slot, we prefer a Mage Blood with Legacy of Jade, Bismuth, and Quicksilver modifiers. This provides 2000 flat evasion rating, plus 45% to all elemental resistances and 30% increased movement speed respectively by default. One of these 3 modifiers needs to be duplicated because they are scaled by the belt's increased effect modifier, depending on the number of duplicated legacy modifiers. That increased effect modifier should be at least 40% or higher. For the boots, There are two options depending on your situation. If you've obtained the 10 additional permanent spirit from Uhtred's boon through expedition, we can run at Ziri's step to push to roughly 10,000 evasion and deflection ratings. If not, use evasion-based boots with at least 30% increased movement speed on the prefix, a deflection modifier, and the crafted spirit modifier on suffixes. Either way, socket Techrod's Gaze for 10% increased movement speed during low life, which is permanently active for us. For the charm, we prefer the cat version, Rite of Passage charm, for its strong buffs granted upon killing rare and unique mobs. Now, let's go over the rotation. The gameplay revolves around maintaining the Pinnacle of Power buff from Adonia's ego. This buff requires manual activation and runs on roughly a 1-minute cycle. When entering a map or preparing for a boss, the setup is as follows. First, cast Powered by Verisium assigned on weapon set 1 to get universal infusions. Then cast Firestorm to switch to weapon set 2 while consuming the infusions and getting power charges. If we haven't reached maximum power charges in this build, that would be 7. Repeat both steps. Once we have full power charges on weapon set 2, cast Spark to switch back to weapon set 1. Then, activate Pinnacle of Power to consume the charges and gain the buff. From there, we can start mapping. Again, make sure you have allocated the Infusion of Power node through either Anointment or a Megalomaniac Jewel. During mapping, we cast Spark and let the trigger system do its work. When the Pinnacle of Power buff approaches expiration, repeat the setup sequence. For bosses, cast Ice Storm assigned on weapon set 2 to apply exposure and lower their elemental resistance. Then, switch back and hold Spark. Most bosses go down in a few seconds. The buff monitoring is the main management overhead. It's not complicated, but it is something that needs attention. Overall, this is an endgame caster build that prioritizes balance over raw peak damage. We've used specific interactions to counter this league's changes to monster ailment thresholds and toughness. The goal was to make trigger-based skills perform consistently in solo content with high monster effectiveness. And, as every mapping clip in this video shows, comets are firing reliably and clearing well on 200% delirium maps, with at least 70% increased monster effectiveness and increased monster ailment threshold modifiers. That said, trigger-based caster builds this league are not cheap, and this one is no exception. At 3000 divines, it delivers strong mapping performance with satisfying coverage. But if we don't have a specific interest in trigger-based casting, there are other builds in the current meta that reach similar endgame performance at potentially lower costs. The configuration is also detail-heavy, and the mandatory Pinnacle of Power buff management is a playstyle that won't suit everyone. If those trade-offs sound acceptable, then this might be a build worth trying. If this was helpful, please consider a like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.